Compassionate, we'll give them a bit of extra room. For now, I suggest we should get moving. Stand around here too long and the spirits start from here, I promise. Now take a look at the building behind me. That is the Hotel Victorian, oldest operating hotel in the city, still going strong, and our first stop of the evening. Beautiful, beautiful building, although under construction. Now's the time to take your pictures. Yes, very good, very good. And now I need everyone to gather in nice and close. Even closer. I'm talking to you, sir. Of course. It is time for our very first forbidden act of the evening. A daring jaywalk across the street. Follow me. And let's gather in nice and close, please. All right. You know, I love this little hotel. Hotel Victorian, built in 1898. 1898, that was a tough year for me. But here, in Vancouver, the Klondike Gold Rush was on. This was a boom town. Men lined up 10 thick on Water and Cordova streets, waiting to get outfitted for their adventure north. Now that year, around April time, I ran into some trouble here in Vancouver. Not what you think, but enough trouble that I needed to leave. I headed north to the Yukon. Did you know the Klondike had 10 men for every woman? I like them odds. Of course, I never went there to find a man. I left Vancouver because I had to. I chose the Klondike for independence. A girl could make herself a fortune in the saloons and honky-tonks of Dawson City, dancing, singing, keeping lonely sourdoughs company of an evening. Booked myself a steamship from here to Skagway, Alaska. Hiked and then canoed the rest of the way to Dawson City, beating heart of the Yukon, dressed as a 14-year-old boy the whole way. I wore a cap and breeches, carried this pocket watch.
Very manly.
Even schoolboys can accessorize, am I right? Now those Mounties, they ran a tight ship up in the Yukon. They wanted properly prepared gold miners coming in, not good time girls. I managed to convince a hopeful sourdough to let me pretend to be his son. Told him who I really was. Well, he didn't need much convincing. He figured he found himself a wife on the way to his lucky gold strike. Handsome man he was. Oh, thick black beard, kind eyes. Gave the poor soul the slip as soon as we were through the Mountie checkpoint. That was in June. Next time I saw that sourdough was early December. A Mountie carried him down Main Street, Dawson City, strapped to the back of a mule. His hands and feet were just black stumps. Frostbite. Wasn't going to be his wife then, neither. Heard he was dead by Christmas. I never did learn his name. You know, people talk about the Klondike being a harsh, brutal place, where good men were broken, where gold hid but was seldom found. Well, I had the time of my life in the Klondike. I had men throwing money and gold at me like confetti every night of the week. I bathed in champagne. I had more diamonds and jewels than the Queen of England herself. Sure, I kept the odd fellow company on a cold, lonely evening. So what? Girls like me, we kept that town alive. Imagine it was you, sir, grubbing for gold, 16 hours a day in all manner of weather. Woo. I'll wager you'd like a little bit of cheering up afterwards, am I right? Oh, perhaps I should ask this lady right here. You know, we girls, we stuck together. My closest friend was Kitty Rockwell. She was a star, a legend in the Yukon. She had this way with men. She could bring a whole room full of men to their feet with a single flick of her heel. Those old sourdoughs, they worshipped Kitty. And she was kind to me. First day I met her, told her my whole story. She said, "Sarah, don't matter what you've done. It's what you will do that counts. Would you like to see a photograph of Kitty? Of course. Here she is, Miss Kitty Rockwell. Woo! Klondike Kate, Queen of the Yukon. This was her most famous dress from Worth's in Paris. Now, I won't tell you how much this dress cost. That would be gossip. Oh, well, since you asked. $1,500. That was a lot of money. You could buy yourself a house in Vancouver for $1,500. Well, I can tell by your reactions that housing is still just as affordable today. She let me wear it one time, the dress, but I got my heel caught in the lace and I toppled over on stage. It wasn't my most elegant moment. Kitty and I, we worked that stage together for years. Warmed a lot of men's hearts, I ain't ashamed to say it. But eventually she left, went on tour in search of fame and fortune, and so on the best and warmest of terms, we parted ways. I stuck it out, but in the end, the Klondike died. Only the most optimistic, deranged sourdoughs held out. People were leaving in droves. I figured it was time to come back to Vancouver, take my chances. Checked in here the day I returned. Stayed in that room right there. But friends, we can't stand around here all night talking. There's a fire coming. Let's head back to Gastown, shall we? Commercial building in the British Empire. Quite impressive. 1867, a man arrived at the waterfront nearby in a canoe. Also in his canoe was his wife from the Squamish Nation, his mother-in-law, a dog, a chair, and a barrel full of whiskey. Does anyone know who this man might have been? That excellent guess. Not who I'm looking for, unfortunately. That would be Gassy Jack, otherwise known as John Dayton. Originally from Yorkshire, England, he was a sailor, a gold miner, and by all accounts, an enthusiastic consumer of alcoholic beverages. I'll show you a photograph of Gassy. There he is. He loved that chair. Took it with him everywhere he went. Now, he hadn't canoed all the way from England. He had been working in New Westminster as a ferry captain when he heard of an opportunity. You see, the Hastings Mill had just opened a mile or so east from here. Mr. Stamp, who owned the mill, liked to keep it dry, no liquor allowed. If you worked in the mill and you wanted a drink after a hard week's work, it was a long walk. 10 miles to New Westminster to the nearest saloon. So Gassy figured if he built up a saloon around here, it would be far enough from the mill that Mr. Stamp couldn't close him down, and close enough that the mill hands wouldn't mind the walk. So one day Gassy crept into the mill and he suggested the plan to the workers. They liked the idea. They liked it so much they even offered to help him build it. Took them one day. A shack with 2 barrels and a plank of wood for the bar, and Gassy's Town, or Gastown, very good, was born. But why was he called Gassy? Well, his diet of beer and whiskey certainly affected his digestive system, but that's actually not why he was called Gassy. In my day, to be gassy meant to speak in an idle or boastful manner. There weren't many who had a good word to say about Gassy Jack while he was alive, and we won't find any monument to him in Gastown today. For you see, after his wife died, he remarried to her niece, only a young teenager at the time. Her name was Quahalia. The marriage had the blessing of the Squamish Nation, but it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. In the end, they weren't married long. Gassie's boozing caught up with him, and she had the good sense to leave him. Quahalia went back home to live with the Squamish people, and Gassie's drinking spiraled out of control, and he passed away soon after, under a mountain of debts in 1875, aged 44. But Quahalia went on to become a much loved and admired matriarch of the Squamish people. She lived to be 90 years old, outlived her husband by 73 years. Oh, beautiful name she had. Try saying it, Quahalia. Very good. Perhaps next time you're down here, we'll be strolling through Quahalia Town. Friends, this fire is getting very close. Let's continue on into Gastown. Follow me this way. Friends, can anyone tell me the name of the street we just crossed? Without looking at the sign, I see you in the back, sir. Yes.
Water Street.
Very good guess, very close, but not quite.
Oh, wait.
It is Cordova Street, very good. In the 1880s, this was the edge of town, a ramshackle town on the edge of a vast continent. Who lived here? Well, a few of us women, mainly men, usually drunk. Hordes of them staggering between the drinking holes of Water Street. Vancouver in the 1880s was no place for a child. We had a body house here before we had a schoolhouse. But in fact, the drunk men were mostly harmless. The real danger lay in the logging camps and mills. An inquisitive child could easily be crushed by a falling tree. Or picture a child that sneaked into the mill, torn in two by Mr. Stamp's mechanical gang saw. But there was one danger, closer to home, of which every parent warned their child. Don't climb down the well. The North Shore, much like today, had masses of water, resting in lakes and tumbling down creeks, but here in Gastown, for much of the year, water was scarce. We built cisterns to catch rainwater. Some people even dug their own private wells. One of those wells lay very near to where we are right now. It served the houses that once lined Cordova Street. When the Great Fire came, in June 1886, it swept through Gastown in 20 minutes. Every building on Cordova Street was lost. One building survived, a hotel on Water Street. It sat at the end of this alleyway, now long gone. Friends, why do we think that that one building survived when all the others were lost? That is a great guess. It was a strong building, but the buildings on Cordova Street were strong as well. The clue as to how this building survived lies in who was staying there. Loggers. They knew what they were doing out in the forest wasn't safe. They were rushing to clear the West End. There was too much debris, too much fuel for a fire. So the legend is those loggers filled the hotel rooms with blankets and buckets of water. When the fire came, they knew what to do. They soaked the blankets in the water and they pushed them against the walls and windows. They literally held the fire back, saving the hotel and their own lives. Everyone else had one chance. Make it to the inlet. 2 blocks that way. Sprinting for your life, you might have made it. You might have made it before that fire ate you up. You might have seen a small child on the way, picked her up and saved her life. One of the houses on Cordova Street was home to a young family, a mother, father, and a newborn baby boy. The first thing that mother would have known of the fire was the smoke pouring in through the front door. She'd have heard the crackling outside. With her husband being away at work, she picked up her baby boy and she stepped outside into an inferno. Now the loggers in the hotel, they heard her screams, but they were already doing all they could to save their own lives. What was she supposed to do? Don't climb down the well. She said it herself to us boys and girls growing up on Cordova Street over the years. Don't climb down the well. What was she supposed to do? She was found the next morning. still holding her baby boy, every inch of their skin, hair, and clothing pitch black with soot. But not a single burn on them. She climbed down the well, and she didn't fall, and she didn't slip. She made it all the way to the bottom, and she clung to her baby boy with everything she had. But a raging fire eats up every atom of oxygen that it can find. And they suffocated. That well lay very near to where we stand right now. After the fire, it was filled in. The city rebuilt. People moved on. But come to this alleyway, deep in the night, with only the moon for company. Stand here for a moment. The air might appear dense, hazy, even in the dark. You might smell ash. And rest your ear against one of these old brick walls, or, if you're really brave, against the ground. And you might just hear a baby softly crying, or the voice of a young mother saying, "Please, don't climb down the well." There's more to this fire, friends. Follow me. The year of the City of Vancouver's incorporation. This street looked very different to how it does now. There was a blacksmith's, various watering holes, a jailhouse, and a gun store. In 1886, my sister, Marianne, and I worked as chambermaids for a wealthy couple named Mr. and Mrs. Tompkins, whose house sat on this block. Over here was the parlor with a big chaise lounge. Oh, I sat in it every chance I could. And over here was the bedroom with a 4-poster bed. Oh. Over there was a little vanity table where Mrs. Tompkins kept her powders and her brushes, and right about where you are sitting, sir, that was the most important place in the room, where they kept the chamber pot. Do you know what a chamber pot is?
A pot is a chamber. Well, it is there. It is there.
It is there. Now, they were a kind couple, the Tompkins. Mr. Tompkins had this funny way of talking. "Sarah, have you emptied the chamber pot this morning yet? It's becoming a rather noxious smell in the living quarters." Not sure why it was always me who had to empty the chamber pot. I suppose my sister Marianne was much older than me. 25 years old, a grown woman. She was tall and gangly. Mrs. Tompkins, who loved to gossip, used to say that Marianne had arms like sticks and fingers like twigs. Marianne had wild hair. She sort of looked a bit like a willow tree. She was more of a mother than a sister to me, really. I never knew my mother. She died when I was a baby, and our father left shortly after. Poor Marianne. Left alone in this tiny town site. It was 1873. She was 12 years old with a baby to raise. We survived. You know, I enjoyed working here. It was 1886. I was 13 years old. I remember the day well. June 13th it was, a Sunday. It was a scorcher. It was baking hot that day. I'm working away, scrubbing the floor on my hands and knees. Woo! Marianne saved my life that day. She was working upstairs when she heard the screams from the loggers, peeked her head out the window, seen the smoke. God bless her for coming down to get me. "Sarah, there's a fire. We have to run." Of course, we never knew it would come so fast. 1 minute, there's a bit of smoke in the distance. Next thing you know, Marianne and I are running full tilt down Water Street. Now, I was only 13 years old, but I could sure as hell move when there was a fire licking the skin off my back. Buildings weren't going up in flames. No, they were exploding from the heat. The metal rivets holding the sidewalk planks together were heating up and firing like shrapnel all around us. We passed the gun store just before the fire did. 10,000 rounds of ammunition exploded in seconds. My ears were ringing in my head. We hung a left at Carroll. We headed straight for the inlet. Like anyone with any sense, we dove right in. We stayed there for a while. There's so many of us floating in the water. People were crying, praying, just trying to breathe. The Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh people saved a lot of lives that day. They had a fleet of cargo canoes moored on the north shore. As soon as they saw the smoke, they piled in, canoed across the inlet, and they fished us out one by one. Now, what caused this fire? Greed. The railway had arrived, and their boss, William Cornelius Van Horn from Chicago, swaggering around town with his Canadian Pacific Railway money. El Presidente of the CPR. Another charming gentleman with a chair. This is the man who sacrificed the lives of hundreds of Chinese railway workers just to save a buck. Land clearing in Vancouver was out of control. The CPR had crews working the West End morning, noon, and night. They logged and cleared that land like a plague of locusts. You don't have to be a genius to see it would all end in tears. Now, common sense says that you leave clearing around a bushfire, stop it from spreading. But folks cut corners when there's money at stake. They figured, it's a still day. What is the worst that could happen? Well, about 2 p.m., the winds picked up. A handful of small fires turned into an inferno. A wall of flames, 30 feet high, headed east to Gastown. People did strange things that day. I didn't think much of it at the time, but when Marianne and I were running down Water Street, we went right past this fellow carrying a mattress on his back. But he was headed back the other direction into the fire. Turns out later he'd remembered his brand new mattress, forgotten his wife. He was going back into the fire to get her. I expect he was dead before Marianne and I even reached the dock. I knew this clock would interrupt me.
What's going on?
I was floating out there with Marianne when through the flames we heard these screams. A mother holding her baby. We tried to swim closer, but the heat was unbearable. Next thing you know, that mother launches her baby into the air like a rugby ball. We're up to our necks. The water is filthy. There's wooden planks with nails sticking out, floating all around us. Marianne stuck out a long, slender arm, and she snatched that baby out of the air with one hand. Mom survived too. Soon as Marianne caught the baby, that mom was down to her corset, hair on fire, dove straight in. They both survived. A miracle. As you know, not every mother was so lucky. It was said that he was a rich man who had his life and a blanket that night. Friends, let's head back to Water Street. Take a look at how this street looked before and after the fire. Follow me this way, please. Name of this building here behind you. Yes, it is the Hudson House. Those signs were rather helpful. Now, does that name mean anything to anyone?
A recently closed company?
That is correct, the Hudson Bay Trading Company. In the 1890s, this was their warehouse here in Vancouver. Sourdoughs lined up down this street waiting to get in, stocking up en route to the Klondike. Here, they purchased liquor, furs, shotguns. And what is this building made out of?
Brick.
And why is that?
Brick is strong.
Brick is very strong and brick does not burn. You see, a year after the fire, the city of Vancouver passed its 49th bylaw. From that day forth, every new building in Gastown had to be built out of?
Brick.
Very good. All right, now I'm going to show you a photograph taken from exactly where you're standing. The view down this street, taken in 1886, before the fire. Yes, that is how our city looked. See how close the forest is to the edge of town there. You'll see that large tree stump in the middle of the road. That has thankfully been removed. And way in the back here, do you see that little white house with the veranda? You see it there, sir?
Yeah, I see it.
Yes, you see that house there? Remember that house. We're going to talk about that later. But first, I'm going to show you another photograph taken from the exact same spot, same view down this street. This one, taken in 1886, a year after the fire. You can still see ash on the ground.
The telephone poles.
The what? Sorry?
The telephone poles.
They do have telephone poles now. They are moving up in the world. They've got electricity. Woo! And you will see this man up on the balcony. You see him?
Yeah, why is he there?
He is probably thinking, should we build a railing? Is this safe? Those men below, they built it, and they're saying to him, nah, you're good. That man died years later in his sleep. Now, friends, it would be remiss of me to bring you to Gastown without taking you to the world famous Gastown steam clock. This way. Vancouver's most famous landmark, the Gastown steam clock. Its engine is a Stuart No. 4 single expansion, double acting, 1-inch piston engine built by Stuart Turner Limited in Henley-on-Thames, England. Woo! I memorized that. Thank you, thank you. Now the steam comes from an underground steam heating system that still today powers much of downtown Vancouver. Friends, does anyone have a guess as to what year this clock was built?
1910.
Excellent guess. It certainly looks like it was built back then. But in fact, this clock was built in 1977.
Bruh.
Yes, my response exactly. Show of hands, who here is older than the historic Gastown steam clock?
Let's combine.
All combined? Well, congratulations. According to the City of Vancouver, you count as historic relics.
Oh, good.
Great work. Now let's venture to where the real history lies. Learn more about that little white house with the veranda. On the way, I've got a story for you. Follow me, friends. Well, they were called sourdoughs because they liked to enjoy a bread made by a yeast that gives the bread a sour flavor. Being so cold up in the Klondike, we couldn't use regular yeast and stop it from freezing. We had to keep it warm. So we had this special yeast, and we filled pouches with it, and we stuck it underneath our armpits and under our skirts to keep it warm. So next time you're in a fancy bakery and you're looking at a nice loaf of sourdough, try to think about where that bread might have come from. Now, I would like to remind everyone that we are standing on unceded Coast Salish territory. The Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people of Burrard Inlet never signed any treaty with any European settlers. We are here today as their guests. Now, the year of the fire, 1886, the water's edge came right up to the backs of the buildings that preceded these. The original buildings were held up by wooden posts over the water, hence the name Water Street. But step back further in time. Imagine that you were standing here on June 13th, 1792, 94 years to the day before the Great Fire, and you would see a man in a rowboat, age 34, with a small crew headed up the inlet. Does anyone know who that man was?
No.
That would be Captain George Vancouver. And what was Vancouver looking for so far from home? Great guess. It wasn't quite the Klondike Gold Rush yet. What was your guess?
Maple syrup.
Another great guess. You know how we love maple syrup here. Closest answer so far. He was looking... Oh,
The Fountain Youth?
he was not finding that. No way. He was looking for the Northwest Passage, a way of trading overseas between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans over the Arctic. Well, he didn't find it in Burrard Inlet. He didn't find it further up north either. Captain George Vancouver would have no idea that this great city would be built here in his name. It wasn't him who decided to call the place Vancouver. No, that was William Cornelius Van Horn's decision, almost a century later. He wasn't going to call it Gastown, named after an old drunk from Yorkshire. Vancouver met Musqueam people here. In fact, his logs document that his interactions up and down these coasts were almost entirely peaceful. They welcomed him and his crew as their guests. And while Vancouver was one of the very first Europeans to set foot on these shores, Europe had already left its mark on the Coast Salish people. A European disease had traveled the width of the continent, killing as it went. Vancouver met communities who were still suffering from this terrible onslaught. It was said of this epidemic that it is the greatest human catastrophe in history, far exceeding even the disaster of the Black Death of medieval Europe. The first signs of smallpox are mild. Cough, headache, fatigue. In a few days you might feel much better, thought you just had the flu. But soon the lesions appear, not on the skin, but in the mouth and throat. In about 24 hours, the rash, your body covered in pustules, hard like beads under the skin. Eventually that rash starts to blister, sores start to crack, and a terrible stench emanates from the skin. If you were lucky, those sores would eventually scab and heal. You would be left horribly disfigured and probably blind. If you were unlucky, the lesions in your throat would make drinking impossible. You would literally die of thirst, or worse, the rash turns inwards, hemorrhaging beneath the skin. You could bleed to death from your eyes, nose, and ears. It is estimated that over half of the Coast Salish people died from smallpox. And what of Captain George Vancouver? Well, he returned home to London, England after 4 years at sea, and he died in obscurity there not long after. He is buried in a modest grave in a quiet churchyard, and well, his spirit may wander that cemetery, restlessly searching for the fabled Northwest Passage he's fated never to find. It's the ghosts of smallpox that lie upon this land that we honor here tonight. OCM. This way, friends. Yes, stood right here. Slightly larger building now. The beautiful name, For Lease. Now this house belonged to Bertie Stewart. Before the fire, she used to pay me and Marianne $2 each to clean the bedrooms. More money than Mr. Tompkins ever paid us. When I first started working for Bertie, I was 11 years old. Now, Bertie's house sure was something here in Gastown. She had antique wooden furniture imported from France and Japan. Oil paintings and prints hung the walls of young women in alluring poses. Champagne sitting on ice. I had never seen champagne before I met Bertie. Of course, in the Klondike, I drank champagne like it was water. Now, Bertie was in her 40s, and she looked like $1 million. Dark hair cascading down her back in ringlets. Long emerald green dress, hem sweeping the floor. She used to always wear golden jewelry, and I remember she used to wear these fabulous black lace gloves. Now, about a month before the fire, I decided to hide in one of the closets after my shift, see what really went on in those rooms that I spent so long cleaning. Well, it was eye-opening. I will say the proceedings didn't last very long. The gentleman, if I can call him that, seemed rather pleased with himself. The woman seemed completely disinterested in the entire affair. After that experience, I decided to keep a closer eye on the men who visited Bertie Stewart's house. My conclusion: show me a man in Gastown who claims to have never visited Bertie Stewart, and I will show you a liar. You, sir? You ever visit Bertie Stewart? Only a few times? I could have sworn I saw you sneaking out just the other day. Could have been you? Well, Bertie was the most popular person in town. Her and her girls would parade up Water Street at the end of each week, flashing their garters at men as they went past. And where were these women headed? Don't guess church. These were not God-fearing women, although they did have a lot of men calling out for God. But they were headed to City Hall to pay their weekly $20 fines. That was a lot of money back then. That's about $500 in today's money. But it was the best piece of advertising she ever did, and that went on for years. The city of Vancouver's only source of revenue, I kid you not. You know, Bertie and her girls funded the city's first fire station. It was on order when the Great Fire came. Arrived 2 weeks late. That night, Bertie set up a tent and she helped care for the injured and the burnt. After the fire, she rebuilt, but it was never the same. The railway men had arrived. They brought their wives over. Blue noses. They didn't want a body house in the middle of Water Street. Nobody knows what happened to Bertie in the end. By the Klondike Gold Rush, she was long gone. She just disappeared. But this was her house. Little white house with the veranda. I think she would have liked this fancy furniture store. Friends, next time you walk by this building, take a look in the window. You might see a woman standing there in a long emerald green dress, wearing black lace gloves. It's just Bertie, keeping an eye on the place. Follow me, friends. This way. All right, friends, just a quick stop here. Take a look at this building to my right, the red building here. That is the Burns Block, built directly after the fire in 1887. First building they built after the fire, Burns Block. Someone had a sense of humor. It housed the Alhambra Hotel. And now take a look at this building behind me. You'll see the large entryway into Jailer's Mews. Now this building was built in 1930, but the building before it looked exactly the same, had that same large entryway. Any guesses as to what that building might have been?
Firehouse.
The firehouse, very good. It was the city's first fire station. We know who paid for that now, don't we, sir? That was Bertie and her girls. The large entryway was so that the horses could come in and out. All right, let's cross the street into Jailer's Mews. Follow me this way. Work was hard to come by after the fire. Eventually, Mr. Hackman, the owner here at the Alhambra Hotel, offered Marianne and I room and board to work as chambermaids. Worked there for years. By the 1890s, girls plying their trade in there. This was a respectable hotel. Not that Hackman was in any way respectable. Oh, I did everything I could to avoid being alone with that man. Back then, the threat of smallpox hung heavy in the air. There was always whispers. It was coming. This was the year. One infected sailor, that's all it takes. 1893, July time, in fact, it did come. Aboard CPR steamship, the Empress, hit Victoria first. The body girls were the first to be struck down, poor souls. Within days, Victoria was mayhem. People were fleeing. It was pandemonium. The mayor of Vancouver at the time was Frederick Cope, and he did his very best to live up to his name and do exactly that. Cope. He put a cordon around Vancouver. Nobody from Victoria was allowed in. One man tried. Captain George Rudlin took his steamship, the Yosemite, packed it full of people fleeing Victoria, charged them an arm and a leg. It was a hot night, hazy. People packed onto the deck of the Yosemite like sardines. At the front of them all was Rudlin himself, arms crossed, chest puffed out, chin up. Well, he had courage. I'll give him that. You could see the haunted faces in the portholes. He sailed across the Georgia Strait and into Burrard Inlet. Here on the dock, Vancouver police stood arm in arm. Behind them, firemen, hoses primed. Behind them, a mob. 200 men. Nobody from Victoria was allowed on shore. Rudlin was dissuaded from docking his vessel. He sailed up the inlet and he docked it in the Hastings town site near where the Second Narrows is today. Nobody stopped him. By July 23rd, smallpox had arrived in Vancouver. It took Marianne She'd been feeling ill for a couple of days, but we hadn't thought anything of it. Mr. Hackman knew it immediately, saw the beads under her skin crawling up her neck. He wrapped his face and hands in linen. He didn't want smallpox. He grabbed Marianne by the hair and dragged her through the hotel to this storeroom, threw her in, locked it shut. He nailed a piece of yellow cloth right here. That was the sign, yellow. Quarantine for smallpox. I remember I was turning over a bed in a guest room when Hackman marched in. Marianne has smallpox and is waiting in the storeroom for Dead Man's Island. Dead Man's Island was just off Stanley Park. That was the pest house where they took you if you caught smallpox. If you lived, you came back. If you died, you stayed there. I pushed past Hackman and I ran down the stairs to here, but he never followed me down. He had gone missing with his key. He didn't want smallpox. Mr. Hackman, please bring me the key. I tried everything I could to bust open this door, but it wouldn't budge. I could hear Marianne on the other side. I sat here on these steps and I did everything I could to comfort her, the way she comforted me when I was a child, by sharing stories and nursery rhymes. Eventually, I heard the wagon. It pulled up right here. Hackman had been watching all of this unfold from that window of the Alhambra. He finally came down with his key. He came toward me. I was frozen. "I'm sorry, Sarah." He unlocked the door. Poor Marianne. She could hardly stand. I helped her into the wagon. Imagine that. Putting your only sister, your only family, your only flesh and blood in the whole world into the wagon for Dead Man's Island. That was the last time I ever saw Marianne. She was buried July 29, 1893, in the cemetery, Dead Man's Island. Friends, I have one more story for you tonight. We've got a murder to solve. Follow me. A tough time for me. My sister Marianne had recently died of smallpox and I was spending a little too much time on the drink. But as we heard, here in Vancouver, 1898 was an exciting time. Right where you're standing was the dock for the Union Steamship Company. Not this photo. It doesn't look like much, but this is where Marianne and I dove in the water to escape the Great Fire. It's where George Rudlin brought his steamship infested with smallpox, and it's where sourdoughs were pouring into boats headed north. Now, April time that year, I was working in here, the Sunnyside Hotel. I had moved up in the world. I had been a chambermaid. Now, I was a barmaid. And I had a new hobby, gin. I was 25 years old by now. There it is, the Sunnyside Hotel. It stood right across the street from the Alhambra, and for those of you that are eagle-eyed, you will see Bertie Stewart up on the balcony, looking fabulous as ever. Am I right, sir? Now, I was partial to a warming beverage or two during my shift. A glass of gin seemed to help the hours roll on by. The night in question was a wet night. A fellow walks in, takes a seat at the bar, and he orders a whiskey. He was tall, had a narrow face, wiry build. John Bray was his name. We got to talking. Bray was here to get outfitted for the Klondike, but he said he had lived in Gastown before. I didn't think much of it at the time. There was all kinds of men passing through this town over the years. But as one gin turned into two for me and one whiskey into three for Bray, his story began to unfold. He said he left Gastown in 1873. He said his wife died and left him with 2 girls, a grumpy 12-year-old and a baby. He said he wasn't cut out for fatherhood. He was used to working in the logging camps and mills, only coming home for a couple months in the winter. He wasn't used to screaming kids and all that bother. He said he gave it 1 week after his wife died and then he left town. Told the eldest he was going to visit their mother's grave one Sunday morning and he never came back. He had no idea what happened to those girls. He never sent them any money. Too hard in those days, couldn't trust it would be delivered. Well, he had worked his way across Canada in the logging camps before finally settling down in Raglan, Ontario, where he met a woman there. But he was sick of her too, so he was going to try his luck in the Klondike. I asked him what the names of his girls had been. He said the eldest was called Marianne. He said he couldn't remember the name of the baby. John Bray was the last patron to leave the sunny side that night. He stumbled out around 11 p.m., said he was going to walk along the water to his rooming house on Alexander. Well, I went behind the bar, took a revolver from the cabinet, and I went out the door behind him. He was only about 4 feet or so in front of me. A haze of whiskey and gin hung between us. My whole life, I imagined what I would say to my father if I should ever finally meet him. Why'd you leave? Did you ever think about us? Did you ever even care? Well, I never spoke those words. I raised the revolver and I put 3 bullets into John Bray's head, straight in the face. I went back inside, I put the revolver back in the cabinet, and I finished off the rest of that gin bottle. I figured it wouldn't be long before the police walked in. Next day, I woke up, slumped over the table. I had a splitting headache, looking through an empty gin bottle into an empty saloon. I got up a little gingerly and I peeked out the window, but there was no sign of Bray. Not so much as a drop of blood on the ground. The rain had seen to that. A day goes past, nothing. 2 days, a week. I put 3 bullets into John Bray's head right here, and there's not so much as a peep about it. Finally, after 3 weeks, I see this on the front page of the Daily Province News, April 25th, 1898. There's Bray. Not a bad likeness either. Bullets in his brain is the headline. Now those bullets that I put into Bray's head, they didn't kill him. They lodged in his skull. The lead poisoned him, sent him insane. He wandered through the forest for days, caked in blood, screaming, thrashing. Eventually the police found him, took him to the jailhouse, thought he was drunk. When he was the same way the next day, they took him to the hospital. Now those doctors, they cleaned him up, but they couldn't find the bullets. They were lodged too deep in his skull. After 10 days and nights, they released him, thought him a madman. Bray then went to Griffiths and McPherson's on Cordova Street, the druggist. He bought rat poison. Why, he then walked 4 miles to a remote ranch in South Vancouver to commit suicide. No one will ever know. He opened up the door to that ranch, he laid down, and he died. Didn't even eat the poison. Those bullets were finally enough. A farmer found him a few days later. Rats had eaten off what was left of his face. The coroner identified him by the name sewn into his handkerchief after they washed off the blood. Now when I saw this, I knew my time in Vancouver had come to an end. That same day I was headed to the Klondike. I had 5 great years there. But all good things must come to an end, and when the Klondike died, I knew I had to head back south. Only planned to stay here for a couple nights, really. Checked into the Hotel Victorian, came down to the sunny side, thought I'd enjoy a glass of gin for old time's sake. When the police walked in, they knew, and I knew. They had found their man. They arrested me for the murder of John Bray. Turns out Bray and I weren't the only people on Water Street that night. My old friend, Mr. Hackman, had watched the whole thing unfold from that window of the Alhambra. In court, Hackman said, "I watched Sarah Briers execute John Bray in cold blood." Who was the jury going to believe? The respectable hotel owner or the drunken good time girl? Verdict was unanimous. Judge didn't even look me in the eye when he passed sentence. November 20th, 1903, I was hanged by the neck in New Westminster for the murder of John Bray. But I still call Gastown home. Keep an eye out when you're down here. You might see me walking around. One of my old acquaintances, Bertie Stewart, my sister, Marianne, even John Bray himself, that poor lost soul. Friends, I want to thank you for listening to my story, for understanding and for exploring Gastown with me, a place full of rich history. Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Vanessa Lazar. I am a professional actor and storyteller with Forbidden Vancouver. Thank you so much for being such a great audience tonight. There's a few questions we get after every tour. I'm going to quickly try and answer them, and then you guys are free to roam the streets on your own. First question we get is, how much of this tour is fact and how much is fiction? We have some fictional characters, for example, my character or my sister Marianne, but every scene that you saw here tonight is based off of real documented history from the Vancouver City Archives. So the stories from the Great Fire, including the woman who threw her baby into the water, or the man with the mattress on his back, both true. Smallpox arrived in the 1700s, had a huge impact on Coast Salish people, and it arrived again in 1893. Dead Man's Island was the real pest house in Vancouver. And finally, that is the real front page of the Daily Province News, April 25th, 1898. John Bray was shot in the head 3 times by an unknown assailant. I feel like we're about to get hit by this car here. Assailant. He wandered through the forest for days before passing away, and his killer was actually never found. So if you feel like doing some researching tonight, maybe try and clear my name. That would be awesome. Next question we get is, where is a good place to get a bite or a drink after the tour? I have one of these for each of you. This is the Forbidden Vancouver Guide on where to wine and dine in Gastown. It is full of recommendations from our team. You can also find information on all of our other walking tours and save 15% on your next visit. So come find me when I'm done. I have one for each of you. Next, you might be wondering, do I accept tips? Oh, well, I sure do. I take both cash and card. I'm actually saving up to buy a second black lace glove, complete my collection. Any little bit counts. I do just want to let you know that just by being here tonight, you're making a real difference in our community. We donate a portion of the sales from every public walking tour to charity. Last year, we donated almost $8,000, which is pretty incredible. And if you're interested, the charity partner for this particular tour is the Urban Native Youth Association. They do an incredible...